detail about the campaign against British politicians, not Northern Ireland politicians. Secondly, I went with my lawyers to see a Labour junior minister of the period and again briefed him on the situation. I also wrote to Sir Harold Wilson at the time and gave him details of the campaign. There are also available, as Marilyn Rees has shown, quite a number of forged documents that have been in circulation for a number of years. And indeed, a number of the targets of the disinformation campaign testify themselves to the fact that they were the subject of these smears. Now, I think most reasonable people believe that that is a prima facie case that something was going wrong. And even though they don't accept everything I say, there is certainly sufficient evidence there to merit a serious inquiry. That's all I'm asking for.
And your other problem is, isn't it, that Archie Hamilton also made it clear when he made the statement yesterday, and no doubt Tom King will say the same, that your allegations about a cover-up in the Kincora boys' hostel are not accepted either by the government.
I'm sure they're not, because I think that the government now has had either 3 or 4 inquiries into the Kincora boys' home. But one must remember the very last inquiry excluded specifically from its terms of reference any consideration of the role of military intelligence or the police as part of their terms of reference. Now, having taken out that chunk, how can the public have any faith in the nature of the investigation into that particular incident?
Colin Wallace, we'll come back to you a bit later, but Michael Mates, how serious, you've heard Colin Wallace now, how seriously do you take the broad spread of his allegations? Erin Neave, after all, your former Northern Ireland spokesman, Erin Neave, clearly took Colin Wallace seriously.
He acknowledged his letter in terms that politicians have written to constituents and others in many ways.
And used it as a basis for his speech.
I don't know whether that was taken...
It's what he says.
Yes, but that's talking in opposition, without the evidence, without the government information, which is now available. I think there are 2 threads to what Colin Wallace was saying. The first is the question of his dismissal, which I think the government has handled quickly and well and honourably. They're looking into that matter as to whether the appeal board had the information they should have done. If something went wrong, in order that justice is seen to be done, I personally hope he will be compensated if it's found that his forced resignation was unfair. The second matter is the smear against politicians, and this story has been going the rounds for a very long time. As you mentioned, or was mentioned in the film, Peter Wright raised it, put it in Spycatcher, admitted afterwards on the Panorama programme that he was lying, and he didn't mean that there had been a plot against these ministers. And when you look at the robustness of Harold Wilson's premiership, the thought that he was being undermined by a campaign orchestrated by MI5 and in the media is about as ridiculous as some of the claims that are being now made by certain Tory politicians that you're all a bunch of left-wing hooligans who are trying to undermine a Conservative government. I think it means we've got a thoroughly good, healthy, questioning media, and I don't take those allegations seriously.
Well, Ken Livingstone, how do you respond to that charge from Michael Mates that this simply doesn't stand up, this wider smear campaign?
But if we look at the evidence, and let's not talk about allegations, but forensic evidence, we have Erin Neave's own handwritten letter thanking Colin Wallace for the disinformation information he's given him. We then see in newspaper reports of speeches that Erin Neave made in the following weeks that he'd used all that information. We have to ask, how did Erin Neave know of the existence of Colin Wallace? It's because Erin Neave was up to his neck in the dirty tricks brigade in Northern Ireland. He knew what was going on. He was in contact with Peter Wright. He was in a position where he met with Peter Wright in the closing days of Edward Heath's leadership of the Tory party and discussed the replacement of Heath. And this is the weakness of the government. They want now to try and have an inquiry simply about the getting rid of Colin Wallace. What's really damaging here is the senior member of the Tory party after Margaret Thatcher, the head of her private office, the person who organised her leadership election, was in contact with treasonous officers in MI5, was aware of what was going on in Northern Ireland, and we have a right to ask, did he ever indicate to Margaret Thatcher what was going on? And if that is the case, and there was some indication of that, why did she take no action to stop it?
Let's come
Can I just help Ken Livingstone, because I was the secretary of Erin Neave's committee during this time. I didn't realise you were raising this time when we were in opposition. You weren't there. Erin Neave, to my certain knowledge, had none of the access to the government that you're talking about. I worked with him and saw him on a daily basis. Now, if we're talking about a disinformation campaign, if we're talking about black propaganda, that was going on. My complaint when I was serving there was there wasn't enough of it, and the IRA were doing it a damn sight better than we were. And it was to remedy that the people got the act together in 72 and 73.
So how would Erin Neave have known that Colin Wallace was performing that disinformation function and contacted him?
Presumably
Who
because
told
Colin
him
Wallace
about
wrote
that?
to him.
Right,
No.
I want to move on, bring in Seamus Mellon. Seamus Mellon, what do you think, if you believe even half of what Colin Wallace is saying, what do you think are the implications of it? Can you, from a Northern Ireland point of view, tell us how important this thing is, if it's true?
I'm glad you make that point about the north of Ireland, because that's where the real damage was done, and it should be centred on that. The reality of the situation is that Mr. Wallace was part of this operation. Put it in another way, he was paid to tell lies on behalf of the government. Yes. In many ways, he was the biter bitten. So that isn't the issue. The issue is what damage was done to the whole process of justice and law in the north of Ireland, how many people suffered either through Kincora or people who may have been killed as a result of dirty tricks activities, how many people have had their characters assassinated because of it. And the second point is, how could misinformation or disinformation, whichever you like to call it, be disseminated in the House of Commons for so long without having without the government being able to say, look, these are the facts of the case. Now, I hope this inquiry centres on the things which are important rather than the unimportant parts of it, because if we do not, we've had so many inquiries in the north of Ireland, if we have another one without credibility, it will do even more damage.
You're returning to the point that Ken Livingstone was making earlier. Michael Mates, would you like to confront that? I mean, is it not extremely serious that ministers should find themselves misinformed right up to the present time about something that took place so long ago?
I think that is most regrettable, that ministers were misinformed. And the difficulty there, of course, is it was another administration that was involved, and the ministers concerned were in opposition. But Ken Livingstone and Seamus are both actually confusing two things. If there has been misinformation and lies told to damage United Kingdom politicians, that is wrong. And I would not defend it. What I see is no evidence of that. But if there were campaigns to discredit terrorists and those who supported them, and of course Ken Livingstone is party pre in this because he does support Sinn Féin, he makes quite clear his sympathy for them and they are behind the IRA, then I believe that is a perfectly legitimate arm of the fight against terrorism, and it should be used and used properly within the law.
Fair enough, Seamus Mellon. Disinformation against terrorism.
It is not fair enough, because the government must always act inside the law and must retain the integrity of the law.
I said within the law.
You'll never
previous
defeat
to that,
terrorism by using the methods of terrorism. And what we know is this, that all these allegations were sent to the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, in November 1984. The documentation, the forged CIA documents, the details of all the phony operations.
That was for an
Why was it
exercise.
not dealt with then? This Prime Minister, more than any other, knows what goes on. She controls the civil service to a degree unlike any of her predecessors. For her to come along now and say, I was misled, just isn't on. We know that's not the way this administration
Well, now, Michael
runs.
Mates, what do you say to that? And what do you say, more importantly, to Tony Benn's insistence that this kind of inquiry that's been instituted, we're going to hear about more tomorrow, is simply not wide or broad enough, and there should be a Commons committee to summon Mr. Wallace and look at this thing really properly?
Well, I'm unable to comment on that because it was raised in my committee this morning and is on the agenda for next week, and if the committee chose to look at it, they would. I don't know whether they will or not.
Do you approve of that?
So I can't comment on that. I'm the chairman. I can't comment on that. But what I can say is that Tom King will be making a statement tomorrow, which I hope will satisfy all those, except the likes of Ken Livingstone, who are not prepared to be satisfied, and Tony Benn, by anything that's said. But you must be absolutely clear. If something has gone wrong and there's been a cover-up of a crime, then government should have no part in that. But within the law, to operate disinformation and try and discomfort terrorists and those who support them is, in my view, perfectly legitimate, and it's a dirty business on both sides.
Right, Colin Wallace, final word from you, please. What was it about what you were doing? What was it about what you discovered that you revolted from, and what was it that you approved of? Do you, for example, go along with Michael Mates on disinformation against terrorism being acceptable, but some of the other stuff not being acceptable, or did you actually find the whole lot acceptable?
No, I would agree with Michael Mates. We were both in headquarters Northern Ireland at the same time, and I think that part of my activities I saw as legitimate. My problem is that I was in Northern Ireland, as I saw it, to help defeat terrorism. By being deflected into the political arena, I was not doing the job that I felt I was there to do. It's as simple as that.
Colin Wallace, Seamus Mellon, Michael Mates, Ken Livingstone, thank you.